Network standard hours is the new term for extended access and GP access that's basically going to take over from the next few months. But it's caused a lot of concern for many practices and networks in terms of what this actually means. In this episode, we're going to explain the key contractual parts in the DES itself and what this means for your area. So let's take Enhance Your Primary Care and Learning. Hey GP learners, in this episode I'm going to share with you basically the contract from the network DES and the part specific to the extended hours portion, which is now going to be called network standard hours. I'm flying solo without Andy, so definitely leave me a like if you find this episode useful, as we basically demystify what the contract says, what you need to be aware of, and how this is going to change practice care in your area for your patients. We're going to have a look at the DES contract itself, so let's bring it up for you, and we go to basically page 43, and that's where it starts from the service requirements, specifically talking about extended hours access and enhanced access. These are the two parts that are already existing in your area, and this will continue until the end of September, because from the 1st of October, the network standard hours will take over. Just in terms of recapping what you should already be doing and providing in your local area. So it talks about the fact that initially there's going to be a change and what this means, but then it confirms all the different information about what you should already be providing. So as part of the extended hours, you should already be providing appointments that are available to all registered patients within your PCN that can be available for emergency or same-day booked appointments with a healthcare professional employed in the area and can be within your network, and are held outside times of the core PCN network contract hours. So those are the main requirements, basically, in terms of what you should already be providing. It's important to remember that is outside the core GMS contract, effectively. And there is this clarification that, say, for example, if you've got one practice, the core contract is open till 8, and another practice whose contract says that they're only open till 6:30. Well, the practice open till 6:30 can provide enhanced access for the practice that's open till 8, but not in the same premises, and basically how the appointment split would work and stuff. So that's explained here in more detail. This also explains the number of appointments you should be providing in your enhanced practice area. So minimum of 30 minutes per 1,000 registered patients per week. That's the current contractual amount. This is meant to be rounded up or down to the nearest 15 minutes, and it's meant to be in blocks of half an hour. Okay, so that's what it states, and this is based off your list size as of the 1st of January 2022. In terms of basically, there is this contractual part that states that if you're not able to provide some appointments for whatever reason, then they need to be made up effectively. And there's been a lot of stuff in the media in the past couple of weeks about this. This is stuff that was already in the contract. This is not new information. To be honest, it's just a way of the media making a big story out of, to be honest, nothing. It's stuff we all knew about. It's just because it's happened at the Easter bank holiday. You know, that thing that nobody ever anticipates and stuff. But anyway, it talks about the contract and what you should be providing and how this will look within your area. It also makes sure that you need to inform your patients about the availability of the appointments and stuff. And this is the key part that we just mentioned, 8.17, where extended hours, where the appointments cannot be offered on usual days, like a bank holiday, that they need to be made up within the next 2 weeks. And that's in addition to the ones that's already been provided. So that basically you're still providing the same amount that you're contractually required to do. As I said, it's not new. Then it basically talks about various different aspects, and this is information you should really be aware of in terms of closures of practice, that kind of stuff. So there is a move towards basically practices not being shut on a half day on a regular basis unless they've got explicit written consent. It does specify that consent can only be until the 31st of March 2023, at which point it should be reviewed and potentially stopped by the looks of it in terms of that happening. So those practices that are still shut on half days need to have written consent from your local CCG, or I'm assuming this will move towards the ICSs in the new world as we move forward and stuff. And then it talks about if there is no written approval. We then go on to the main section, which is the part that talks about what changes from after the 30th of September. So in terms of the initial stuff, there is some preparation work that needs to be done by networks. In particular, it talks about this reformatting of stuff towards what we call network standard hours. This is going to be the new term for enhanced access and extended access and all the other things and stuff from the 1st of October. 8.1.17 basically talks about what the key actions that PCN networks need to be doing now. So you need to be doing this now. And this is effectively that they must produce an enhanced access plan. And this needs to be submitted by the 31st of July 2020 to the CCG in whatever format they basically request. Hopefully it's not going to be something like a fax or something like that. I'm assuming it's going to be a document or some sort that we email across to them. And then they basically then have a month to process that until the 31st of August, at which point they can discuss and negotiate things and stuff in terms of what that will look like. The key requirements. So how a PCN will engage or has engaged with its patient population will be considered patient preferences, including consideration of levels, capacity, and demand. So you can discuss with your local population what this is going to look like. What mix of services will be provided during network standard hours. What appointment types and channels will be available to patients during the network standard hours, including how the PCN will meet the requirements to ensure a reasonable number of appointments of face-to-face consultations are available. So basically saying that you can't just provide telephone or online consultations. It does need to be a mix, and it does state about the staff mix as well in terms of what that needs to look like. Where the PCN intends the site location to be situated for patients' access in-person face-to-face services, taking account reasonable travel times for local patients as agreed with the Commissioner. So basically, you can't have a hub that's in another part of the city or something like that that's far too far away from your existing population and things. Proposals for how the PCN will deliver the necessary system interoperability to support the delivery of extended access. So interestingly, this puts the responsibility on the networks, not on the CCG, to provide interoperability, which may be a challenge in some places because we know that interoperability, unfortunately, is not great at times in some places. And any plans of contracting arrangements in respect to the enhanced access. So if you are contracting this to another area, to a local federation, to another team and stuff, that basically those contracting things need to be in place. So then the commissioners will review the enhanced access plan and agree a final iteration of this, as we mentioned, by the 31st of August. And at that point, then the period between the 1st of August and then that period afterwards will then be used to enact this plan to start from the 1st of October. The next part, the following agreement, any significant change will require approval from the Commissioner. Change that will be considered, but not limited to, the PCN site from which the physical services will be delivered, the subcontracting arrangements, the staffing mix that's allowable, and the timings for the minimum of 60 appointments per 1,000 patients. Important to remember that network standard hours does change the requirement because it's combining those two parts of extended access and GP access to effectively being a total of 60 minutes per 1,000 patients, not the 30 minutes that was only required by the network to provide, and the other 30 or 45 minutes, depending on which areas you were in, was provided by someone else. So there is some flexibility in terms of the timings, and this does need to be discussed in your local area and stuff. In 8.1.21 then talks about in terms of preparing this plan, there needs to be some engagement and stuff, and a report brought out in terms of the access being available. And then we're talking about various different aspects that come through in terms of what the Commissioner may consider reasonable and things from that point onwards. It does again emphasize about the data sharing in 8.1.24. And then from then onwards, the enhanced access will be delivered by the network itself from that point. So what does this actually mean? Well, from the 1st of October, it talks about in 8.1.27, so this is one of the key parts, the enhanced access between the hours of 6:30 and 8 p.m. Mondays to Fridays, and between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturdays. And this is what's going to be called the network standard hours moving forward. The Commissioner can be, as I mentioned earlier, have some adjustments to this in terms of the site, the types, the skill mix, and the appointment times. And there needs to be some evidence to understand what that means. So you're worth looking at your local population to find out what provision they actually want. In terms of subcontracting arrangements, these need to be put in place. And in terms of contracting itself, that the appointments need to be bookable, and this is the key part, so 8.1.29, available to all PCN patients. Now, interestingly, it doesn't state that all appointments need to be available to all PCN patients, but all patients should be able to book into the appointments that are available. So that interoperability will be important, and it does mean that there should be some element that the patients have access to all the different types of appointments that are being offered by the network. Offer general practice services and pursuant to the network DARES, so that's additionally the ARS roles and that kind of stuff. or book all appointments that may be made in advance or on the same day by the PCN core practice, regardless of the access route. So regardless of whether they're making them through online, telephone, face-to-face, they should be able to book into them. Minimum of 2 weeks in advance is the next part. And it should be accessible to all the core practices in terms of them being able to make those booking arrangements and things. Should be available for some online booking on the day and for in the future, and particularly if there's no triage needed for some of these appointments and stuff. There should be a reminder mechanism in place, and patients should be provided with a simple way of cancelling the enhanced appointments as well, so they shouldn't have to go through complicated routes to do so. And in line with some additional guidance that if any appointments aren't used on the day, then these should be available to NHS 111 to use, particularly in the evening hours and stuff. And again, data sharing agreements and stuff need to be in place. It then talks about multidisciplinary teams, so basically the ARS roles being available within these. And in terms of network standard hours, there needs to be a mixture of face-to-face, telephone, and online, as it best in terms of suiting your local population. And in a location that's suitable for all patients within your network to access. So again, emphasizing that you can't provide this from a central location that's too far away for your patients to access and things. And ensuring that the premises from which the enhanced access is delivered is a minimum equivalent to the number of sites within the PCN geographical area. So you can't provide it from 10 sites if you've only got 5 practices, for example. You wouldn't really want to do that anyway, would you? But anyway. It then talks about the formula. So the formula working out how many appointments you need to provide. So it's additional minutes equals the PCN adjusted population divided by 1,000 times by 60. And this is based off your population list size on the 1st of January. It's the same rules as before. It's just increased from 30 to 60 minutes. And then it's important that you're not to restrict the appointments to the contract hours and that kind of stuff. So basically, all patients should have access to these, and they must be in addition to existing appointments provided outside of the core practice hours and stuff. 8.1.30, sorry, does specify about this whole point about that the local CCG can agree different timings if appropriate. And it can be outside the one specified, but you do need to talk to your local CCG about this, and you probably need to have some evidence as to why this needs to continue. I guess one of the challenges of trying to move from the previous system to this one is that it's a much smaller window of time frame that you can provide the appointments in. And that has a huge complications in terms of funding it and stuff, and actually raises the potential viability of some of it if it was to stick to those hours. So I think there does need to be some flexibility here, although some places are going to really struggle. Or you can have a much bigger shift away from GP-based appointments, which may provide a worse service than currently provided. So it is important to note there is some flexibility in this area, and it's important to know how you're going to use that. So let's look at the next section then. PCN must ensure GP cover throughout the network standard hours. So not necessarily that all the appointments have to be provided by GPs, but there does need to be on-site GP cover for relevant appointments, particularly face-to-faces, and basically support from there. And you must communicate the availability of these through various means, whichever you think is best. So the practice website, leaflets, nhs.uk, all that kind of stuff that needs to be informed to the patient. We then move on to the section that talks about the changes in terms of appointments. So making it very clear that if there's bank holidays and stuff, and those appointments need to be made up again. As again, we covered this earlier, it's already part of the contract. And then it makes clear about the telephony and everything else that needs to be available in terms of systems to support and basically access records and everything else to make sure this flows and works effectively in 8.135. And we're talking about various booking abilities and stuff, so the practices need to be able to book in effectively. So following from the available PCN core network practices will utilize core digital capabilities consistent in the PCN in accordance with the requirements of the PCN core practice, so basically making sure you can book appointments effectively and simply. And a PCN must set out how to enhance access will be delivered in the network agreement, so this has to be part of the network agreement and things. It then starts to talk more about capacity demand in terms of the parts that's relevant in terms of trying to understand the demand of your local population. And again, then talking about half-day closures and the fact that this shouldn't be happening, and the process that we explained earlier in terms of you need written confirmation if you are to be shut from the local CCG, and that will only exist until the 31st of March, at which point it will need to be reviewed and whether that will be continued at that point. And then further information about what if a network doesn't have consent to do so and what the implication of that means. It finishes off with PCNs will ensure that the appointment system used for enhanced access can then be identified to the appointment data. So you do need to be able to map those appointments across to the GPAD service that we've talked about in one of our previous videos. You're more than welcome to check that out in terms of having that information. So hopefully that's covered the network standard hours portion and in detail what you need to be aware of. I guess if you're looking for my summary of what you need to do from this point, so this is the key part that you need to have a listen to if you've not picked up any of the other stuff. But effectively, as a network moving forward right now, you need to start looking at your plan in terms of what this means for delivery of appointments from the 1st of October. You need to submit that plan on the 31st of July to your CCG in whatever format they prefer, and then you've got a month to discuss the changes to those to make it relevant in terms of the contracting elements and stuff for that plan to then be submitted for NHS England by the CCG for action in the 1st of October. Key points is that the appointments do need to be available to all patients, but it doesn't specify that all the appointments have to be available to all patients. There is the possibility of providing a chunk of them at a central potential site or federation or other service in, for example, one of the main practices, and then each practice providing its own spoke of appointments as they currently would potentially be doing for extended access as it is. It's important to remember there needs to be a mix of those appointments in terms of face-to-face, online, and telephone, and also in terms of clinician mix that should be available as well in terms of the needs of your local populations. And you need to inform the patients of how this is going to work and look for them in terms of good communication through various different sites, your websites, nhs.uk, social media, etc., and stuff to share that information effectively. And then the rest of it is as it is, basically. It's the standard contract that we've all been working to for the past few years, just clarified and in terms of this change moving towards network standard hours. If you have found this episode useful, please leave a like down below in terms of letting us know this is effective and stuff. And alternatively, you're more than welcome to check out a coming up episode about the impact and investment fund that's coming up about here or so, something like that. I don't know. Let me know what you think, everyone. And as always, gonna keep tech enhancing your primary care and learning. Catch you in the next episode.